Yeah, good morning, friends. As we have initiated the discussion, what Aristotle calls it as techne, and Aristotle even clarified that how philosophy is rooted in basic human instinct, which is simply to seek knowledge. And even he mentioned it very categorically that philosophy is the sophisticated descendant of principal myth making responses to the astonishing world. Carrying ahead with the same discussion of techne, which is one of the important concepts that Aristotle tried to bring to his readers. Aristotle's sketch of human culture is relevant in number of the ways to the poetics. Human beings produce various things, and out of these various things, poems are also produced by human beings. Now, as yesterday when we were discussing about what Aristotle is interested in pointing out, that something which is made is out of curiosity to understand it. Necessary things human beings created first. Once he has created the necessary things, then human moved to recreational arts which enhance the quality of life. And in this due course, activities arose out simply to satisfy the desire to know what exactly makes the life comfortable. The same, everything is coming out of something to know. And as human produces everything, poem is also one sort of production by human beings, and that's why Aristotle says that the production of poems can be a techne. Poem, a production of a poem is an activity which is having its own intrinsic rationale, and it can be rendered intelligible. Now, uh, it is not essential that when a poet produces any sort of poem, the poet is trying to give or is trying to get, or he may not be able to understand the logic behind it, because it is not essential for him to know why he is creating that or what sort of logic he is putting out of his poetry. But poetry, he is trying to express, he is trying to give a sort of quality to human life, trying to get some sort of quality out of it. And that's why the idea of techne, what he is pointing out, that is a productive capacity. And as poem is a production, and that's why it is a productive capacity of intrinsic rationale. While poet is writing a poem, he is having some rationale in his mind. Need not to explain the rationale to all of its readers. It's the work of the critic to find out what sort of rationale, what sort of ideas, what sort of thoughts that the poet is having while writing the poetry. And that's why it is important for all of us to understand the sort of techne that Aristotle is mentioning while any sort of productions came into existence. Now, let me make it very much clear to most of us that in the Poetics, Aristotle does not treat it as a matter of any consequences. That when a poet writes something, it is not a matter of any consequences or his reflective thinking. Aristotle, in Poetics, most of the time leaves certain open ended questions. And that's why what the sort of argument that he is putting in front of us, that a poet, whether he has given a reflective understanding for writing a poetry or whether it is a matter of any consequences that the poet wrote a particular poem, all these things the poet is not familiar with. And that's why Aristotle in Poetics chapter number 8, he leaves open question of whether Homer's grasp of correct plot structure was due to techne or it's an instinct. As I have said you earlier, also in earlier lectures, a couple of days back, I said you that when Aristotle is talking about a poem, he is basically talking, because poetry is not what we are considering today as a poetry. Poetry, in the sense in Poetics, it means by a creative work, that is a drama, poet drama. And then later on, when he talks about drama, he mentioned it very clearly that drama is nothing but an highest refined form of poetry. That's why when he talked about poetry, when he's saying poetry, it means he's also referring to drama. So Homer, that's what I said in chapter number 8, he mentioned it. He left that question unanswered. What sort of plots Homer had put in his epics, put in his writings, whether those plot structure was due to technique or whether it is his instinct, there is no answer for that. And even in chapter number 14, Aristotle suggests that early dramatists discovered the best stories simply those stories which they have used in tragedy. For example, Sophocles used the story of Oedipus, the best story, the best plot. Now, this best story or best plot structure, what he is trying to bring it out, that dramatists discovered the best stories to use in tragedy by chance, by instinct. They got that story, or it may be it is technique, but Aristotle insisted that all those stories discovered by the dramatist that used in tragedy, they are by chance they have discovered it. It has nothing to do mostly with technique. So technique is not uh, what you can say or what you can think, that technique is not at all uh, simply related to the production of good stories or good poems. Sometimes by chance some story was collected by the particular dramatist, and that dramatist tried to give a sort of picture or try to bring out that particular story in front of all of us. And that's why what he is pointing out, what he is saying, that techne is a sort of way that a production can take place. That's why in Poetics you may get some arguments which are sometimes denied by Aristotle himself later on, when he tried to enhance or explain or bring certain ideas and concepts back into discussion. It is not essential that Aristotle, whatever has said, is perfect or he has not denied it. He denied most of the time himself that, okay, what I said earlier may not be have these things related to this particular productive way. Now, he even gives one of very interesting thing that most of the science students used to get it through their knowledge. He said most of the early tragedies or tragic stories, whatever those tragic stories are appearing, the first rate tragic stories may have used the trial and error method. They wrote story, and in trial and error method they put in front of the audience. If it appealed the audience, they continued with the same sort of story. If it is not successful, they dropped that particular idea. So it is a trial and error established a sort of repertory. Repertory is a sort of practical practice house, and in that repertory they try to experiment with various stories. And Aristotle pointed out that those stories were best, were successful amongst the audience accepted, then those stories remained in the public domain for a long time. And that's why you find out, my friends, that most of it is not to say that only two, three dramatists are most important. Why those two, three dramatists are most important? Because the stories which they have used stayed for a long time in public domain. Audience started to understand it. Audience started to like it. Audience feel that yes, this is the story which I think close to me. And that's why most of the time you will find out, my friends, that the drama or the best tragic stories remain with public, remain with audience, simply because those stories are based or are having certain technique, or may have some instinct, may have by chance understood and collected, got by the dramatist. And that's why in his discussion of technique at the beginning of metaphysics, Aristotle notes that unreflective experiences, unreflective experiences may produce the same result as techne used to produce. Remember one thing, techne, once again I am repeating the definition of techne, because what he said earlier, what Aristotle used to call it techne, as I said you in Saturday's lecture also, that techne is usually translated as craft, skill, or art. But what Aristotle defines techne as a productive capacity informed by an understanding of its intrinsic rationale. That is what Aristotle means by techne. And that's why what he said, that it is not essential that all the time techne is working when you are doing, when you are writing, when you are trying to bring certain good stories in front of the audience. Maybe your unreflective experiences, the experiences which doesn't, which the experience which doesn't have any chance to get out, you don't give any sort of reflect, you don't try to bring that experience in front of the people at that time. May be possible those unreflective experience may produce, again I'm using the auxiliary verb may, not must, may produce, there's a possibility, not compulsory. It is possible that the unreflective experiences may produce a sound of result as technique. In general, the ability to do something, the ability to do something well, does not depend on understanding. Please understand this. Hello, remote, your mic is on. Please, please, please. Now, if you see very carefully, doing something well does not depend on understanding. Please understand this. This is a complex thing that Aristotle is trying to put, and once we understand this complex thing, that it will be easy for us to understand, that will be easy for us to find it out. Now, if you see very carefully, my friends, that what he is trying to bring, what he is trying to get, that something which you do well does not depend on understanding, nor does understanding necessarily imply the ability to do it well. Understand both the things. Understanding something to do well does not depend on any understanding. You can do with your instinct, you can do well with your ideas. You can do well that whatever you think you can do it well by your own. Without understanding, you can do a lot of the good things. Sometimes with understanding, you may commit some error, you may commit some mistake. But when you are understanding something, when you are looking at certain things, this understanding never makes you this understanding never makes you to do something well. Or most of the time, understanding, if you're understanding something and you have an ability to understand something well, it doesn't mean that you are going to produce something well. A very simple, a very simple thing to understand is that if we are writing in, if we are able to understand this particular concept with our day-to-day experience in a class. Now, if you see very carefully, when you understand the things well in a classroom, it doesn't mean that something you understood well, it doesn't mean that you have the ability to once again reproduce it well in the next format. You understood something well in a classroom, you understood certain concepts very well in classroom, but when you are producing it in examination, may not be possible that you can able to produce it very well. And that's why most of the time it happens with us that, sir, I have written something very well, I understood the thing very well, I can explain it very well, but I can't able to write it in examination. Or someone who can able to write very well in examination may not be able to express it in a very beautiful way, in a very convincing way. And that's why it is most important for us to understand the fact that how this is what going on, how this is what the creative person who is understanding, who is trying to get the things done, who is trying to bring the things back, may have understanding or may not have understanding. A very interesting example given by Aristotle. A joiner, a fresh apprentice, taught to make a piece of furniture in a particular way. That if he's joining, then he's trying to make furniture. When he's trying to make furniture, what he is doing, that he is being taught by his tutor in some particular way. Make this, then nail it. You can have a good furniture, then polish it and produce it. He may have taught in one particular way by his tutor. Now, when he learned that particular, he may not using or he may not able to understand that why I put all those things together. He may not able to understand the rationale behind putting the legs at a particular distance. Yeah, please. Because I am also, yes, I'm also trying to locate him. I'm trying to stop him, but it is not getting stopped. It is not getting stopped. Both is not getting stopped. I'm trying to mute all. I muted him. Okay, I muted him. Yeah. Yeah. So if you see it very carefully, that when a person is a fresh apprentice who is making a table, he may not able to understand the logic behind keeping the things at particular distance and putting a platform over it. He may not understand. but he may do better than his tutor once he acquired the skill of making it. With the practice, he can able to make that thing once again perfect. He may be better, he may even do it better than a colleague who is having more understanding. With the two persons making the table at a time, one is not at all having any understanding of why I'm doing all those things, but I come to know that okay, this much the distance I should have, and I should have raised the platform over it, and then it is possible to make me a very good and very comfortable table. Other is knowing the logic, other is knowing the rationale behind making it. Other person is able to understand why exactly he is doing all those things. He may have all the understanding, but he may not able to make the thing very beautiful, very good, very good looking. But the one who is not able to understand anything, with a continuous practice, with continuous with continuous making of that particular thing, can make a thing more beautiful, more good looking, more usable than his colleague, without um, without any sort of uh, problems. He may acquire dexterity for making that particular thing. And that's why Aristotle says that maybe the dramatists, maybe the poets have used certain poems, certain subjects, certain topics to give the thing to the people. It means that when they are dealing with a tragedy, it means that when they're dealing with certain stories in tragedy, as he said, it's trial and error method. Later on, once writing the stories in one particular way gives them the idea that okay, how to collect the story and how to give a good formula. Nowadays you have seen that on certain OTT platforms, or in certain films, or in certain television serials, you will find out the same thing, that once the director understood, once the story writer understood that okay, this is the formula which is going to be part of public domain, public will like it, people will appreciate it, he starts putting the stories in the same fashion and try to give it again and again to the public. Now it has nothing to do with technique, it has nothing to do with the part of technique. And that's why there are reasons, there are certain reasons why this principle might apply to poetry especially. The poets must be able to project themselves to the emotions of others. Why we like a poem? The experience that the poet is giving to us is not the experience that we have experienced it in our life. But even we appreciate it, even we like it, even we feel that okay, yes, this is the poem that I am thinking that is one of the best poem that I ever read. Why you are saying so? You have not experienced those sorrows, those feelings, those problems that the poet is trying to bring out, but still it makes you to feel good. That means the poet has acquired the ability to project the emotions of others in a particular way. Now, this ability which the poet has acquired may have the poet may have a natural talent. He may got that thing naturally, God gifted, if I say so, or even a touch of insanity. Now, apart from technique, the natural talent, the touch of insanity are necessary for this. Moreover, metaphor, as Aristotle regards metaphor as the most important feature of poetic language. Metaphor is the most important feature of any poetic language. That is what Aristotle regards as. Now, this metaphor depends on ability to perceive similarities. The metaphor which is used by poet, how the poet use metaphors, that is the ability of the poet That is the ability of the poet to perceive the similarities, the similar things together. And this, what Aristotle says, is a natural gift. It cannot be taught. According to Aristotle, use of metaphor cannot be taught. It has to be a natural gift to that particular poet. You are reading so many books on synonyms, but it is not possible that to remember each and every synonym that you are using for one particular word. Most of the time, people used to say that if you are learning English, learn, you should have a rich vocabulary. But how you will have a rich vocabulary? It doesn't mean that the rich vocabulary you need to by heart each and every word. If you are not able to understand how to use it, and use of any word is require a natural talent. How will you use language? If you are having an understanding of language, but the use of language at one particular moment required a natural talent, and that's why Aristotle is saying that use of metaphor is a natural gift and it cannot be taught. Now, Aristotle is unlikely to have assumed that reading of his books, the Poetics, which after reading that book, Poetics, that would make someone a very good at composing poetry. No, not at all. It doesn't mean that if you are reading or if you understood poetics very well, or if you can able to write down, or if you, you know everything of what Aristotle's poetics talks about, it doesn't give a guarantee that you can compose a good poem. It is absolutely unrealistic to think that poetics as a do-it-yourself manual for writing a poetry. Or if some of you are poets, some of you, if you are writing, you should not feel that okay, I can become a poet after reading poetics. Not at all. It is absolutely unrealistic. If you are thinking so that after reading poetics, after understanding poetics, I can able to compose a good poem, not at all. Even Aristotle, even unlike to comment like this. What is Aristotle's interest in writing this book? Aristotle's interest is philosophical. That is, it is driven by his desire to understand. Now, the production of good poems is an activity that can be understood. And that is what we require to do, to understand what exactly is a good poem. And remember one thing, as if you have seen the syllabus, the objectives which I have written of this particular course, that it makes you to acquaint, it makes you to understand, it makes you to know what exactly the critical norms are. You can able to analyze that particular text, you can analyze that particular poem, to what exactly it means by good in poetry. What is good? How will you define? How will you find out some good in poetry? For that you require to know. For that you require to know what exactly it means by good poem, and that is what poetics helps us to understand what is to be called as good. It is it is not an handbook of creating a poets. That should make clear very well that when you are reading, when you are studying poetics, it is not an handbook to write poetry. Okay. Now, what Aristotle is trying to know, because Aristotle, as I said, you is not a simple critique. He was omnivorous, I may say, because he did pioneering work in logic. Aristotle is studied in logic also. Aristotle is studied in physics, metaphysics, biology, psychology, ethics, and politics. Apart from this critical understanding or literary criticism. he he moved into all these areas. That's why he may use various terms and terminologies that are coming from physics, that are coming from metaphysics, that may come from biology, psychology, ethics, or politics, from where he can get a good idea to explain the things. He has used that. And in Greek, ancient Greek society, as I said, the most democratic society, in ancient Greek society, poetry was an important feature in public domain, in public culture. Poetry was having a very, you can say, great importance in their life. They give a high place to poetry in Greek society, in public culture. And poetry has always excited the wonder, because as we have seen earlier in the discussion, that wonder makes you to know the things, and philosophy is simply trying to seek knowledge. The world puzzles us and arouses our sense of wonder, and for as it arouses the sense of wonder, we try to look for an explanation for that wonder, and that explanation leads us towards philosophy. And that's why Aristotle, while writing on poetry, this poetry had always excited the wonder which Aristotle sees as the root of philosophical inquiry. And the Greeks habitually talked of intense pleasure. The intense pleasure, Greeks want an intense pleasure, and that intense pleasure, Greek used to say that it has to be derived from poetry only. Rest of the things cannot derive an intense pleasure, and that's why writing a poetry becomes one of the most difficult tasks in Greek society. Now, Aristotle may also have believed that understanding of the kind he pursues in poetics, it can enhance the pleasure which poetry gives us. Because once you are able to find out that what is to be called as good poetry, and if this what you are writing fits on this parameter of good poetry, then naturally it is going to enhance the pleasure, which is basic expectation of the Greek public culture. And as a pointer to this, it can be found in one of his biological works. As I said, Aristotle works in biology also. In one of his biological works, where he preempts objections to the trivial and unpleasure nature of some of the organisms he will be studying in one of the books of parts of animals, which Aristotle wrote. He has given certain uh, explanation to this, and that explanation seems to be suitable when you talk of a technique. How you can uh, have an idea of good poem, how can you have an idea of what is mean by good writing. Now what Aristotle talks in part of animals, I may quote it, I may read it. There are animals which are unattractive to the senses. There are various animals, you know it very well, my friends. There are animals which are unattractive to the senses when one studies them, but even in these, nature's craftsmanship provides innumerable pleasures for those who can discern the causes and have an aptitude for philosophy. Now, let me explain this one first sentence to you that makes you to get it very comfortably and carefully. Some animals, the students who usually go in a laboratory for doing practicals in the subject called zoology or biology, if you're 11th, 12th student of science, you enter into your lab, zoology lab for practical, and you are dissecting the frog. Now, if I say, okay, again, go and catch the frog, you seems to be it seems to be unattractive for your senses to touch the frog. The touch of frog makes you a little bit uncomfortable. But when you put that frog on a dissection table and you dissect it, you find it the way that nature has crafted, the way that the whole system is being created inside. The stomach or the lungs, the heart, the veins, how it has been put in a very proper way. It is not getting disturbed anytime, anywhere. Look at your own body. Everything is kept at its own place. Your heart is having its own place. Your kidney is having its own place. It is not been dislocated anytime if you even jump. Now, this nature's craftsmanship, if you're looking into it, if you're thinking that, okay, this is a very, very insensible thing, or I don't like it. But if you're looking into the philosophy of it, if you have an aptitude for philosophy, you may enjoy that. That yes, this is nature's craftsmanship that I am observing. That how nature has created everything, how nature has made everything. I'm observing it very carefully, how it has kept each and everything at its own places. Now, you require to have an aptitude of philosophy. That's why I'm saying if you are trying to find out something good, if you want to get an intense pleasure, you should have an aptitude of philosophy. And again, I am saying how philosophy is going to be part of your understanding, because it arouses the sense of wonder, and it makes you to get an explanation of various things, and that makes you to lead towards philosophy. And that is why Aristotle is saying, again, continuing with the same statement that he has made it in parts of animals. It would be unreasonable, I'm quoting Aristotle. It would be unreasonable, in fact, absurd, if you got pleasure from studying pictures of these things. Because then we are at the same time studying art, or we are studying art at the same time. We are simply studying art which crafted them. Now, if you're saying that, okay, I'm going to study this on the model, if you're studying this thing into model, instead of studying the things with the sort of original dissection, now nowadays you will find out that it is not possible to have all the things with us. And that's why most of the time we used to have a model kept in front of us, and we are studying that model. Okay, this is what an artery, this is what is called as an heart, and this is what called as so and so thing. Now, if the person is trying to get pleasure after studying the picture, because when you are studying the art which is crafted, either it is an art of painting or it is a sculptor, it is nothing but a technique. Why it is technique? Because for the sake of understanding, you have designed it, and that's why you will not get more pleasure looking at an actual thing. Suppose you are looking, instead of I'm saying all those things, if you are looking a tiger in a picture and a tiger in real, what would you prefer most? Naturally, the tiger in real, because looking a tiger in real gives you pleasure. You are looking at a tiger in its natural form. You are looking at a tiger in its natural way. But if you are looking at a picture, picture can be crafted, picture can be designed, picture can be restructured. Nowadays, you are watching movies where VFX, a term being used, the things the actor used to perform it in front of a green curtain, and then the things have been designed on a computer and put it into that green curtain, so gives you sense to the audience that okay, the actor is fighting with a real tiger. In Life of Pi you will see all those things. That means a picture cannot give you the sort of pleasure that you are going to get it with the natural things. And that's why Aristotle is saying that to understand better that what exactly is good, if the picture, if you're watching a picture, and if you're saying that okay, I am watching a picture, this particular picture, and if I don't know how exactly tiger looks like in its real form, I may not able to find out whether that picture of tiger is good or bad. I need to have some understanding of what exactly is the real nature of that particular thing. And that's why, if you want to understand, if you want to know that what exactly is a good poem which gives you an intense pleasure, in that case, you require, you want, you should have the understanding of what means by good poem then. If you are able to understand that yes, this means by good poem, then you will say that yes, this will give an intense pleasure. But if you don't know what is meant by good poem and trying to find out every poem, trying to read every poem and searching intense pleasure out of it, you may not get it. It will not remain in a public domain for a long time. And that's why Aristotle is trying to say that understanding why an insect or a worm has the form it does is a source of pleasure. This analogous to the pleasure which can be derived from the study of painting if one has understanding of its technique. That is one of the reasons why this was right way to depict the subject. Now this, the analogy implies a sophisticated observer. That means when you are reading a poetry, you should have a sophisticated understanding of a poetry. And that's why Aristotle is simply raising or leaving an open question whether poets proceed by technique, by instinct, or by trial and error. Why? How these poets can able to do write something good? Because as a critic, as a reader, as a person who is interested in understanding the poetry, can able to find out certain qualities of good poetry and may put that particular poem into that into that framework and try to get it that yes, it is a good poem giving me an intense pleasure. May not follow the same sort of rules and regulations that one is designing for a good poetry, but some poem may not fit into that framework, still it gives us intense pleasure. So you cannot say that why poet is, how poet is doing all those things. Whether he's using techne, whether he's using his writing by instinct, or whether he's doing trial and error method, how this poet has given the things to us, we are not familiar with it. Similar thing can happen with painters also. The painting which gives me pleasure, the painting which gives me better feeling, I don't know how this poet has, how this painter has painted this thing, whether it is by technique or by instinct or by trial and error, how he made it, we can't able to find it out. And that's why he used to put both the things together, poetry and painting. And that's why we cannot suppose that any casual observer will have more explicit grasp of requirement of technique than the artist. We are not able to understand whether it is technique, whether it is instinct, whether it is trial and error. It is not at all possible for any reader. Same thing he is saying, that no casual observer will have a more explicit grasp of understanding of the requirement of technique. So Aristotle must be comparing the expert naturalistic pleasure in understanding of natural phenomena. By knowing natural phenomena, you can get a sort of pleasure out of it. You will have pleasure because of knowing the natural phenomena of that particular thing. But when expert critic derives from his or her appreciation, an expert critic derives the same sort of pleasure with his appreciation, it seems to be that you are trying to get the pleasure out of it. And that is what most of the time happens with us. If you are not able to understand any poem, if you are not able to understand any play, if you are not able to understand any writings, we immediately move to its critical appreciation. Because critic had studied it very well, he understood the framework, he understood what is mean by good, what is mean by bad, how to put it good, how to put it bad. He knows it very well. That's why he has appreciated from his perception, and his perception we are appreciating rather than appreciating the original text. This is what most of the time happens with us when we say that, okay, I'm reading a critical appreciation of that particular thing. Yes, you can able to understand that thing little bit, but you are not able to get the pleasure. And that's why Aristotle is saying that if you are not able to understand, or if you are not getting pleasure of it, then you are simply following the critical appreciation done by any critic. You are following the perception of that critic. You are not developing your own perception. And as we shall see, that Aristotle regards poetry and painting as fundamentally the similar activities. They are the similar activities. So, poetics, understanding poetics, the book Poetics, may enhance the pleasure we derive from a well constructed play. It will help us to understand why it is good. People will ask after completing of your post graduation, someone will ask you a question that why you say that Shakespeare is a good dramatist. What are the reasons for that? Because the world says Shakespeare is good, you are also saying Shakespeare is good? Or because you know what is mean by good and how to understand good and how this good gives you pleasure, you know it better, then you can able to say that why he is called as one of the greatest dramatists of the world. Because certain norms, certain rules and regulations, certain framework is required to understand what is good and what is bad. And this book, Poetics, may enhance. May enhance. I'm again using the word may. I'm not saying it must. It may enhance the pleasure we derive from a well constructed play by helping us to understand why it is good. Because most of the time we are unable to understand why this is good. And poetics is trying to make us to understand the thing that why this thing should be called as good. So this is the first important concept that we need to understand, that every poet or every painter, once again I'll repeat the thing, poet doesn't mean in Aristotle's Poetics that one who writes a poetry. Because later on when we move ahead and when we will have a discussion on lots of things of Aristotle, in that discussion you may come to know that Aristotle is saying that the tragedy is the most refined form of poetry. It is not drama. It is the most refined form of poetry. That means poet means, if you want to understand, poet means a person who creates, plays with words, whether he's a dramatist, whether he's a poet, because these two genres are the ancient genres in literature, poetry and drama. These two are the ancient genres of literature. Later on, you have fiction and non-fiction added into it. And that's why we need to understand this particularly, that techne is, once again, I'll say that techne is nothing but a productive capacity informed by understanding of its intrinsic rationale. This technique helps the person to create good. Now, the things which the poet has created, whether the thing is good or bad, if the thing is good, it doesn't require any technique. That's why Aristotle himself raises the question that he left that question unanswered. Whether it is technique, whether it is his instinct, or whether it is his trial and error, that this particular poet has created this particular thing. You may understand something because once you understand techne very well, because you require to have an intrinsic rationale to it. And if you understand techne very well, then and then it is possible for us to move for his other concepts called imitation. If you don't understand techne very properly, then it will be little bit difficult for us to understand what exactly it means by imitation later on. And that's why Aristotle is trying to bring that we need to understand, and that is not the claim of Aristotle that after reading the book of Poetics, you may able to compose a good poem, but you may able to understand what is good. This is the basic thing that we need to understand when we are talking about Aristotle's poetics. If anybody asks you any question that what exactly it is a poetics, poetics is a text which makes you to understand what is good in poetry, what is good in drama, what is to be called it as good in drama and poetry. And that's why Aristotle's poetics is one of the basic text for understanding of criticism, for understanding of poetry, for understanding of drama. Now, the part of animals which talked about the model, and when we discuss about imitation, we find it out that the passage which I read from parts of animal, that passage explains a pleasure which expert critics can derive from a skillful depiction of some unpossessing object, because that object is not in our possession, but we have derived or we have depicted that thing very systematically. Nowadays, if you visit to any medical college, let me make it very clear to most of my students that don't ever think that while you are doing MA in English, it means that you have to study only drama, poetry, novel, non-fiction, essays. No, 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 no. A student of literature need to move across the stream of knowledges. Nowadays, if you go to medical college, you will find out that there are no human bodies for understanding. So they are not dissecting the human bodies. Now they have a models with them. If you see nowadays, when the students who are learning on Byju's app, the school app, they are getting 3D images in front of them, and each and every 3D image is being shown to you. That means it is not possible to handle that particular creature in front of you, or you cannot possess it. But you can draw pleasure after looking that model also, because you are familiar with it. Again, I'm going back to that particular word where Aristotle had said that you can make some model beautiful, you can make some model, or you can point out that this painting is good if you are familiar with the fact that what exactly its natural source is, and how you will able to understand the natural source of it. Then and then it is possible for you to understand how this model, whether this model is good or not good. And that's why you need to get pleasure if the model is good. And the expertise on which this pleasure depends is not to be expected of a majority of people who view such paintings. If you have seen an abstract art, abstract modern painting, how many of us will able to understand this abstract modern painting? We even don't know what exactly it means by an abstract painting. If you visit to any art gallery and if you ask what sort of painting this belongs to, if it is a Gothic structure, that is a Gothic painting. And if you are able to understand what exactly is Gothic structure, then you are able to understand what is meant by Gothic painting. If you are looking into postmodern painting, there need to be an abstract painting. And if you are not able to understand what is abstract, what is postmodern, then you are not able to understand the painting. But it is not expected that all the people should understand what exactly it means by an abstract painting. It is not expected from majority. That majority should understand what exactly it means by it is not expected by majority. And that's why we need to understand the fact that majority of people who are viewing the paintings need not to derive pleasure out of it. It is the expertise and a more general explanation for this kind of phenomena is needed. And that's why Aristotle is trying to bring that phenomena clear to its reader in his chapter number 4. In chapter number 4 of Poetics, Aristotle provides us the phenomena of general explanation. And if you see that general phenomena, you are able to understand what Aristotle is trying to talk about all those things. What he said, the visual art in human desire for knowledge. He roots the visual art, painting is visual art. Visual art. He roots the visual art in human desire for knowledge, for the sake of knowledge. The Mughal Emperor Jahangir used to make a good drawing of wild animals. Why is painting wild animals? Because he wants to put it in front of all the people who are not able to move into jungle and watch the animals. He can make a painting of it and say that, okay, this is how it looks like. It is desire for knowledge, to spread the knowledge. Someone looking at a painting, at least he should recognize that what sort of depiction he is watching, what sort of object he is watching. Suppose I put a portrait of three, four Greek persons in front of you and say, please tell me who is Socrates in it. Please tell me who is Sophocles in this painting. And if you have not seen Sophocles anywhere, you will not able to understand that this is Sophocles or this is Socrates. Because the act of recognition, the act of recognition involves an exercise of our capacity for cognition. Act of recognition, act of recognition involves an exercise of our capacity for cognition. And the exercise of capacity is, in Aristotelian word, lies in pleasure. If you are getting pleasure, you can able to know it. You can able to understand it. It's a cognitive process. So the cognition is must an exercise of our capacity of cognition. Capacity of cognition vary from person to person. Not all the person are having the same sort of cognition. How will you recognize? If you are having an exercise of cognition, and if you want to enhance this capacity, the exercise of any capacity is in itself pleasurable. If you are enhancing that capacity, if you are trying to develop and build up that capacity, it gives you a sort of pleasure. And Aristotle is talking of that particular pleasure. And in that particular pleasure, he moves towards one of his most important concept called imitation. We'll continue with imitation in tomorrow's lecture. Thank you, friends. If you have any queries, please feel free to ask. If you are not able to ask now, you have got a WhatsApp group. You can put that query into that particular group also. Do you have any query or question right now? Please. Do you have any queries? No? Okay. Think over it. Once again, if you want, you can listen it. I'll put it on once again. The link I will put it you till afternoon, and you once again listen the lecture. And if you have queries, please put it on WhatsApp group so that I can answer that queries in tomorrow's lecture. Okay. Thank you very much, friends. Thank you.